You are listening to Fall Asleep, to a place where calm stories drift through time, read to you by Boris. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is where you are. If you enjoy calm storytelling, remember to subscribe and let us drift together into tonight's story. Tonight, we travel through quiet centuries, following a single leaf that changed the rhythm of the world. The story of tea begins not with noise, but with silence. It begins with steam rising from a pot of water, with the scent of mountains and rain, and with the slow discovery that warmth can live inside a cup. From the first legends whispered in ancient China to the tea rooms of London and Kyoto, this gentle drink has shaped how humanity rests, reflects, and gathers. So, settle in. Let the day fade behind you. Imagine the sound of water beginning to boil, the faint rustle of leaves, and the moment before the first sip. This is a calm story of patience, ritual, and peace, the story of tea. Long before cities rose and books were written, the land that would one day be called China was wrapped in forests and mountains, veiled by mists that never lifted. It was a quiet world, where each sound mattered. The soft call of a bird, the hum of insects, the faint echo of distant streams. People lived close to the earth, and nature was still the teacher of all things. Among them was a man who was more than a man, the ancient emperor Shen Nong. He was a ruler, a healer, and a wanderer, a figure who listened to the voices of plants and the breath of the wind. His story is old, almost too old to belong to memory. Yet it is said that one day, while boiling water beneath a wild tree, a few small leaves drifted from above and fell into the pot. The water turned a pale golden color. A faint aroma rose with the steam. Curious, Shen Nong tasted it. It was neither sweet nor bitter, but something between clean, alive, and somehow comforting. That moment, so small and quiet, is where tea begins. Not with grand invention, but with accident, curiosity, and a bit of wind. In the centuries that followed, people retold the story again and again, reshaping it with each generation. Some said the emperor discovered the secret of life in that cup. Others said he saw the spirit of the plant, offering calm to restless minds. No matter the version, the idea was the same. Peace was found in simplicity. When you imagine that first scene, do not think of palaces or crowds. Think of a wooden pot on a fire made from dry sticks. Think of silence all around, broken only by the bubbling of water. Think of the moment before the first taste, when nothing is certain, and yet everything is changing. The legend of Shen Nong is not just a story about discovery. It is a reflection of how humans meet nature, not with conquest, but with quiet respect. The leaf fell, and he noticed. That noticing, that awareness, became the heart of what tea would always represent. Over time, others began to collect the same leaves. They dried them in the sun, stored them in jars, and brewed them in clay pots. The drink spread among healers and wanderers. It cleared the mind and soothed the body. Some said it sharpened thought, others said it brought stillness. In truth, it probably did both. Centuries passed, villages became towns. Rituals grew around this simple act of heating water and watching steam rise. Tea was no longer only medicine, it became meditation. To drink tea was to pause the rush of life, to listen, to breathe. The old masters used to say that tea does not shout, it whispers, and perhaps that is why it survived so long. In a world full of noise, tea asks for patience. You cannot hurry it. You wait as the leaves unfurl. You wait as color spreads through the cup. You wait before you drink, and when you finally do, It invites you to stay still a little longer. When you think of this story, imagine yourself there not as the emperor, but as a quiet observer sitting nearby. The air is cool, the fire is soft, the mist curls between the trees. You see him lift the cup and take that first sip. He pauses, eyes closed, then breathes out slowly. Perhaps he feels warmth spreading through his chest, calm settling in his thoughts. Perhaps he feels the world slow down. The story could have ended there, one man, one moment, one taste, and still it would have been enough. But like the ripples from a drop of rain, that first cup spread outward, across generations, across mountains, across oceans. It became a bridge between people and between moments of silence. Even now, thousands of years later, we still chase that same feeling. Each time we hold a cup of tea, we are repeating the same gesture, honoring the same accident, tasting the same calm. The mist has lifted, but the quiet remains. After the story of Shen Nong faded into legend, tea continued its quiet path through the centuries. It slipped from myth into the hands of healers, travelers, and monks who sought to understand the deeper nature of the leaves. Long before tea became an everyday comfort, it was a medicine, a rare and precious gift found in the wild. The mountains of the southern provinces were alive with small, green shrubs whose leaves carried a faint scent of earth and rain. Those who wandered among them spoke of clarity, calm, and renewal. In the earliest records, tea was written about not as a pleasure, but as a remedy. Ancient texts described it as cooling and cleansing, a drink that could steady the pulse and clear the mind. Herbalists believed that its bitter taste restored balance to the body. They spoke of energies that rose and fell within the human form, and how certain plants could guide those flows. Among all the herbs they gathered, tea stood apart. It seemed simple, yet it held something more, a quality that was not only physical, but also spiritual. Healers in small villages brewed the leaves in clay pots, adding other roots and flowers. They observed that those who drank it often grew more alert, yet also more serene. Unlike wine, it sharpened rather than clouded the senses. Unlike strong herbs, it soothed without dulling. They began to call it a plant of harmony, something that could bring the body and the mind into gentle alignment. The practice spread through temples, where monks noticed that tea allowed them to meditate longer without fatigue. In the dim halls of stone and incense, the act of boiling water became sacred. A monk would sit by the hearth, waiting for the first bubbles to rise. He would pour the water slowly over the leaves, watching them unfold as though waking from sleep. The air filled with a faint, grassy fragrance. That moment, silent, steady, and full of patience, became part of the spiritual rhythm of the monastery. For those monks, tea was not a luxury. It was a companion during long hours of silence. It kept the body warm in winter and the mind steady in prayer. They began to see the making of tea as a mirror of the inner journey. You could not rush the water, nor could you force the leaves to open. The process itself was a lesson in stillness. As centuries passed, tea began to take on different forms. In some regions, people pressed the leaves into compact cakes that could be stored for years. In others, they ground them into fine powder. The methods changed, but the essence remained. Tea was a plant that invited patience. It taught that time, heat, and attention could transform something plain into something profound. Travelers carried the leaves from village to village, wrapped in cloth or stored in small wooden boxes. They traded them for salt, for rice, for stories. The tea would be boiled by the fire, shared among strangers who became friends for a night. A sip of warmth, a few calm words, and the road ahead felt less lonely. Even then, long before the world knew what tea truly was, It carried a quiet human connection. In old writings, poets described tea as the meeting of heaven and earth within a cup. The leaves came from the ground, the water from the sky, and the fire from human hands. Together they formed a moment that belonged to all three. It was not just about taste, it was about balance, the earth giving, the water accepting, the fire awakening. In villages nestled between rivers and hills, healers would wake before dawn. They would walk into the mist to gather leaves still cool with dew. The sound of their footsteps was soft, the morning birds just beginning to sing. They would dry the leaves in baskets of woven reed, turning them gently so that none would burn. When they brewed the tea later, it tasted like the morning itself, clean, quiet, and alive. The more people drank, the more they began to notice how tea shaped their thoughts. It did not pull them upward like wine, nor press them downward like sleep. It placed them somewhere in between, in a calm middle space where time seemed to move slower. In that space, work became steady, words came easier, tempers softened. It was said that entire villages grew calmer when the harvest of tea was good. Slowly, tea became not only medicine, but part of life. Farmers who once used it for health began to drink it after labor, to share a moment of rest with their families. The bitter taste, once strange, became familiar and welcome. It reminded them of the earth that fed them, of water that never stopped flowing, of the patience that all growing things required. By the time scholars began to write about it, tea was already woven into the rhythm of the people. It was still humble, no fine cups, no golden tins, no ceremony, only the quiet comfort of warmth passing through cold hands. And yet, even in that simplicity, it carried something sacred. The herbal awakening of tea was not just about healing the body, it was about remembering that stillness itself can be medicine. The world outside may change, seasons, rulers, fortunes, but within a single cup, there remained a promise of balance. A small green leaf had become a teacher, whispering that peace does not come from wealth or power, but from the patient art of paying attention. As centuries moved quietly forward, the drink that had once been a medicine began to take on a new meaning. People no longer reached for tea only when they were ill. They reached for it when they needed silence. It had become more than a cure for the body. It was now a comfort for the spirit, a small moment of order in a world that often felt uncertain. The act of preparing tea was no longer just about boiling water. It was about creating a pause, a brief return to stillness before continuing with the day. Farmers, healers, monks, and travelers began to share the same understanding, that life's rhythm could be measured not by seasons or rulers, but by the slow unfurling of a leaf in hot water. In the mountain temples, monks developed a simple sequence of movements. They would clean the table, arrange the bowls, and sit with their spines straight. Every gesture was calm and deliberate. There was no rush. The sound of water heating, the rise of steam, the scent of the leaves all became part of a quiet meditation. To drink tea was to study patience, to learn how to be present without words. One ancient record described it as the art of pure attention. It said that a true tea drinker did not seek to master the leaves, but to understand them. Each cup was slightly different, each moment unrepeatable. The monks believed that tea revealed the state of the heart. If you were calm, the brew would be clear and gentle. If you were restless, it would taste bitter. The lesson was simple. Before you pour the water, still your thoughts. Outside the temples, common people developed their own rituals. In villages after harvest, families would gather around a small fire. Someone would boil water in a clay pot. The oldest member would pour the first cup, offering it to the ancestors. Steam would rise like incense, carrying gratitude into the night air. The second cup would be shared among those present, not drunk quickly, but sipped with respect. It was a quiet celebration of survival and togetherness. Tea became a way to mark beginnings and endings, a morning before work, an evening after labor, a farewell before a long journey. To share a cup was to share a moment that would never return. It was both ordinary and sacred, the simplest of gestures and yet full of meaning. Artisans began to craft better vessels. Some shaped teapots from smooth clay that held the warmth longer. Others carved small wooden cups that fit gently between the hands. The materials varied, but the intention was the same, to make something that encouraged care. Every pot and cup was made to slow you down, to invite stillness before the first sip. In time, hosts learned to read the silence of their guests through tea. If someone sat in quiet thought, the host would refill the cup without speaking. If someone sighed, they might add a small pinch of fragrant leaves to lift the mood. Tea became a language of gestures, an unspoken conversation between people who valued calm more than words. Philosophers wrote about tea as a symbol of harmony. They said that water was the spirit of heaven, fire was the strength of the sun, and the leaf was the wisdom of the earth. When all three met, balance was born. To drink tea was to witness that balance in your own hands. It reminded people that the great forces of nature could meet in something as small as a cup. Even the design of the room began to change. In some houses, a special corner was set aside, not grand or decorated, but simple and clean. A mat, a small table, a pot, and 2 cups. There, the day would pause. There, a person could breathe without hurry. Guests were not judged by their status or wealth, but by the quiet they brought with them. The more refined the ritual became, the less it was about the drink itself. The taste of tea mattered, but it was never the main point. What mattered was the space between each movement, the waiting, the noticing, the appreciation of how something so small could hold so much peace. There was a saying that began to travel from one valley to another. Tea teaches you how to see the invisible. Those who practiced the ritual understood what it meant. It was not about seeing spirits or signs, but about noticing the gentle rhythm of ordinary things, the way steam curls, the way light moves across a table, the way warmth lingers in a cup after it is empty. For many, these quiet rituals became the first form of daily meditation. Not everyone could read or write, but anyone could boil water. Anyone could wait for a leaf to open. And in that simple act, they found a kind of equality, a shared understanding that peace was not given by gods or rulers, but created by human hands and patience. In a world that was beginning to move faster, tea became an anchor. People could lose their land, their wealth, or their strength, but as long as they had fire, water, and leaves, they could find a moment of calm. The ritual required no temple, no permission, and no audience, only time, attention, and breath. And so, tea continued its journey from medicine to mindfulness, from healing the body to calming the soul. The first rituals were not about performance. They were about remembering that life itself could be graceful when lived slowly. When the last drop was gone and only the faint scent remained, people would sit in silence for a while longer, because they knew that the moment after the tea was finished was just as sacred as the moment it began. After centuries of quiet practice, tea began to awaken another side of human nature, the desire not only for peace, but for beauty. People had long understood that tea could calm the spirit and focus the mind. Now they started to discover that it could also delight the senses. The simple leaf that once cured illness and guided meditation was becoming something more, a bridge between survival and art. No one knows exactly when the first true appreciation of taste began. Perhaps it was a farmer who noticed that leaves picked in early spring were softer, brighter, and sweeter than those gathered in late summer. Perhaps it was a monk who realized that the clarity of mountain water changed the flavor of the brew. Or maybe it was the moment someone first shared a cup with a friend and felt the quiet pleasure of warmth and companionship. Whatever its origin, that small awareness that tea could be not only useful, but beautiful transformed everything. Villages began to specialize. One valley produced a drink that tasted clear and floral. Another offered a deeper, earthier tone. People started to trade not only for the leaves, but for the experience they offered. Tea masters emerged, patient men and women who spent their lives perfecting the balance of water, temperature, and time. They wrote notes on texture, color, and scent. They spoke of body and aftertaste, long before those words existed in any formal sense. The process of brewing became a craft. Each step mattered. Water had to be heated, but never boiled too long. The pot had to breathe, so clay was preferred to metal. The cups had to be clean and unpainted, allowing the color of the liquid to speak for itself. These were not rules of pride, but of respect. The goal was not luxury, but harmony, to let every element, from leaf to hand, exist in quiet balance. Over time, tea gatherings began to replace grand feasts among scholars and poets. Instead of loud music and heavy wine, they met in smaller rooms with open windows. Scrolls hung on the walls, inkstones lay nearby, and a single pot of tea stood at the center. The conversation was gentle, the laughter low. They would discuss philosophy, poetry, and the shape of clouds. When words failed, they would sip, and the silence would finish the thought. Poets described tea as liquid light. They said that it could mirror a person's soul. A clear cup reflected clarity of heart. A murky one revealed confusion. Painters began to capture scenes of people drinking under plum trees or beside streams. Writers compared the swirling of steam to drifting clouds and wandering thoughts. Through art, tea became a metaphor for the fleeting nature of beauty, something that exists fully only when you stop trying to hold it. The taste itself was subtle, and that was the point. Unlike wine or spice, tea did not shout its presence. It asked the drinker to come closer, to listen. Its beauty was quiet and fleeting, like the breath between two thoughts. Those who learned to taste it began to value restraint over excess, silence over noise, and imperfection over perfection. A cracked cup could be beautiful if it held sincerity. A faint aroma could be more moving than a strong perfume. In the palaces of the educated elite, tea became part of etiquette. Hosts were judged not by wealth but by refinement, by how they poured, how they waited, and how they treated their guests. A well-made cup was a gesture of friendship. To refuse it was considered impolite, even unwise. Yet the best hosts knew that the true offering was not the tea itself, but the calm that came with it. As the art of taste spread, it began to shape architecture, music, and even philosophy. Gardens were designed to echo the flow of a tea-gathering, curved paths, quiet ponds, and spaces meant for reflection. Instruments were tuned to softer tones that matched the rhythm of pouring water. Philosophers wrote that taste was not found in the leaf, but in the mind that receives it. Beauty, they said, was not a thing but a moment, and tea was that moment made visible. Travelers who visited distant provinces brought back stories of flavors unknown. Some teas smelled of flowers, others of rain. Some lingered on the tongue, others vanished at once. Each was said to express the land it came from, the soil, the weather, the care of the hands that picked it. To drink a tea from another valley was to taste another world. By now, The act of drinking tea had become a journey through the senses. Sight, smell, touch, sound, and taste all met in one quiet experience. The color of the brew, the warmth of the cup, the whisper of steam, the soft swallow, everything invited attention. Tea had become a practice of awareness, a daily meditation disguised as pleasure. Still, the essence of the old teachings remained. The first masters warned that beauty should never lead to pride. The leaf was humble, they said, and so must the drinker be. A true tea gathering was not about display or mastery, but about gratitude for water, for fire, for time itself. When the last drop was gone, there was no applause, no declaration, only stillness. The host would clean the pot, dry the cups, and open a window to let the night air in. The faint scent of tea would linger for a moment, then fade, leaving behind something invisible but real, the quiet joy of having shared beauty without owning it. The birth of taste was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new way to see the world. Through tea, people learned that refinement was not wealth, but attention. To notice, to appreciate, to be fully present, that was the true art. And in that art, the leaf had finally found its voice. The story of tea did not remain within the green valleys of its birth. In time, the leaf began a journey far beyond its homeland, carried by hands that sought not glory but trade. It traveled slowly, wrapped in paper and tied with string, hidden between bundles of silk and porcelain. There was no fanfare, no sudden discovery, only the quiet persistence of something small and fragrant, crossing mountains and deserts on the backs of animals that knew the weight of patience. The paths that would later be called the Silk Road were not one road, but many. They twisted through the high plateaus of Tibet, the endless sands of the Taklamakan, and the rocky passes of Central Asia. Merchants carried silk, jade, and gold. Yet among these treasures, tea remained the most humble. Its leaves were light, but their journey was long. A jar of dried tea could travel thousands of miles before reaching another hand. What began as a simple trade between neighboring villages became a river of culture flowing quietly from east to west. At dawn, the caravans moved like shadows. Camels rose one by one, their bells ringing softly in the cold air. The traders spoke little, saving their strength for the long day ahead. Somewhere among the load, small clay jars of tea rested beside the more valuable goods. They did not glitter like gems, but they held a warmth that no jewel could give. When the wind cut through the camp, a few men would light a small fire, boil water, and share a cup before the journey began. For them, tea was not a luxury, it was endurance made liquid. In the towns that dotted the route, from the oases of Dunhuang to the markets of Samarkand, the scent of tea began to mingle with the smell of spices and smoke. It was a stranger at first, yet one easily welcomed. Traders discovered that tea sharpened their senses and calmed their tempers during negotiation. A single pot shared between two rivals could turn suspicion into trust. Words flowed more gently after the first sip, and silence no longer felt hostile. Tea, without intending to, became a diplomat long before the word existed. As it reached colder lands, people changed it to fit their world. Nomads of the northern plains mixed tea with butter, salt, and milk, creating a thick drink that warmed the body and filled the stomach. In mountain villages, it was brewed with herbs to protect against wind and frost. Each culture adapted the leaf to its own rhythm, and in doing so, made it its own. The same plant that once grew wild in the Chinese hills now spoke many dialects through taste and ritual. Stories grew along with the trade. Some travelers said the leaves could cure exhaustion. Others whispered that tea carried a spirit that guarded those who treated it with respect. There were even merchants who refused to begin a journey until they had poured the first cup, believing it would guide them safely across the desert. Whether superstition or faith, the ritual gave meaning to long and uncertain paths. When the night winds howled, the glow of a fire and the steam rising from a pot reminded travelers that peace could exist even in the heart of desolation. In caravanserais, those resting inns scattered like islands across the desert, the evenings often ended with tea. Merchants from Persia, India, and China would sit side by side, their goods stacked behind them. They could not always understand each other's languages, but when the host poured tea, no translation was needed. The act itself was enough. Cups passed from hand to hand, and with them came stories of mountains, cities, and seas. Long before the world was mapped, tea had already begun to connect it. The leaves did not travel alone. Alongside them came ideas, poems, and inventions. Paper, gunpowder, and printing moved westward, while music, mathematics, and art flowed eastward. Tea became part of that silent exchange, a vessel of culture disguised as a simple drink. It entered new lands quietly, without armies or missionaries, only through the shared comfort of warmth and time. Some rulers tried to tax it, to measure its worth in silver, but tea's true value was never in its price. Its power lay in what it carried between people, a calm that could cross borders and survive storms. Even when wars closed the routes and empires rose and fell, the caravans still found ways to move. A jar of tea might change hands 100 times, yet the gesture of sharing remained the same. By the time the first European traders heard of it, tea had already passed through countless lives and languages. It had traveled from monastery to market, from desert camp to royal court. It had been drunk from wooden bowls, bronze kettles, and fine porcelain cups. It belonged to no one and to everyone. The Silk Road gave it passage, but the real journey was within the hearts of those who carried it. And so, through centuries of dust and distance, tea became a quiet traveler, humble, enduring, and eternal. It needed no banners to mark its conquest. Its empire was built in moments of silence, in the brief peace between two people who stopped, boiled water, and shared a sip before moving on. When tea finally reached the islands of Japan, it did not arrive with fanfare or conquest. It came quietly, like mist over water, carried by monks who had studied in China and returned home with a handful of seeds and a way of seeing the world. What they brought was not only a plant, but a philosophy. They understood that tea was more than taste, it was a practice of awareness, a daily lesson in stillness. The early Japanese monks planted the seeds in temple gardens, choosing spots where the soil was gentle and the air was damp. The plants grew slowly, sheltered from harsh winds and strong sunlight. The monks tended them as they tended their own minds, with care, patience, and restraint. When the first leaves were harvested and brewed, they shared the drink in silence, bowing to the bowl as if it held something sacred. To them, it did. Tea became part of the rhythm of Zen. It was taken before meditation to clear the senses, after chanting to soothe the throat, and during long hours of study to steady the spirit. The act of preparing tea mirrored the discipline of Zen itself, simple movements performed with complete attention. Every gesture was deliberate, without waste. The boiling of water, the turning of the wrist, the slow pouring each step was both ordinary and profound. Over time, this practice grew into an art. It was called chanoyu, the way of tea, but it was not a ceremony in the modern sense of performance or display. It was an inward journey, a dialogue between host, guest, and the moment they shared. The room was plain, small enough for only a few people. The walls were bare, the light soft, the air scented with pine and smoke. The guests entered through a low door, bowing as they stepped inside, a reminder that humility was required to pass through. The utensils were few and carefully chosen: a kettle, a bamboo whisk, a bowl, a ladle, and the fine powdered tea known as matcha. The tools were not valued for decoration, but for their honesty. A chipped bowl could be more loved than a perfect one because it spoke of time and impermanence. This was the heart of the Japanese philosophy of beauty, that truth lived in the imperfect, the fleeting, the humble. Tea was not about luxury, but about seeing beauty in simplicity. When the host prepared the tea, he did so without hurry. He moved as though the world beyond the walls had stopped existing. The whisk made a soft sound, like wind through leaves. The steam rose slowly, curling and vanishing. The guests watched without speaking, their breath matching the rhythm of the movements before them. When the cup was finally placed before them, they bowed again, lifted it gently, and drank. The warmth filled their hands, then their chest, then their mind. There was no need for words. The masters of the tea way often said that tea and Zen were the same. Both were paths to the present. Both demanded awareness and emptiness. In tea, as in meditation, one could not pretend. The water would show the truth of one's heart. If the host was calm, the tea would be clear and balanced. If distracted, it would lose its grace. The process revealed the person. To prepare tea was to polish the self. As centuries passed, the way of tea spread beyond temples into the homes of nobles, poets, and warriors. Yet even as it entered the world of power, it retained its quiet soul. Great samurai lords built small tea huts beside their castles, places where rank meant nothing. Inside, all were equal before the bowl. A warrior could sit beside a monk, a poet beside a servant. The only rule was presence. The moment you entered, you left behind the noise of the world. The tea masters refined every detail of the experience. The garden path leading to the tea house was designed to slow the guests' steps. Each stone was placed to encourage mindfulness. The sound of water in a small basin invited the visitor to wash his hands, not only for cleanliness, but to cleanse the mind of distraction. By the time the guest entered, he had already begun the meditation. Inside, silence was not emptiness, but fullness. Every creak of the floor, every breath, every flicker of candlelight was part of the ritual. The host and guest were not performing for each other, they were sharing an awareness of time itself. Tea was not the goal, but the medium. The drink existed only for a few moments, then was gone, but the peace it left behind could last for hours. In the writings of the great tea masters, they spoke of 4 virtues: harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. These were not lofty ideals, but practical truths: harmony between people, respect for the tools, purity of mind, tranquility of spirit. To live these virtues during the making of tea was to bring them into every corner of life. By the late medieval period, the Japanese way of tea had become one of the purest expressions of calm ever created. It was art stripped of ego, religion stripped of doctrine, beauty stripped of show. In a single bowl of tea, one could glimpse the entire universe: water, earth, fire, air, and human hands, joining for a brief and perfect moment. To this day, when a bowl of matcha is prepared, that same silence lingers. The guest bows, the host pours, and for a breathless instant, time stands still. Tea has no beginning and no end. It is simply the shape that peace takes when shared. Far from the calm temples of Japan and the misty mountains of China, the story of tea took on a very different life across the endless plains of Central Asia. Here, under vast skies and harsh winds, the drink became something else entirely, a companion of survival. The steppe was a place where warmth meant life, and comfort was a luxury carried in memory. In this world of motion and endurance, tea found a new purpose. The Mongols lived on horseback, following the seasons and the herds. Their homes were circular tents made of felt and wood, built to rise and fall with the wind. Inside, the fire was always burning, even in summer, for the nights were cold and the air unforgiving. When travelers arrived, they were greeted not with wine or water, but with a steaming bowl of tea, though this was not the delicate green tea of monasteries. It was thick, salty, and heavy, made to nourish as much as to warm. They called it sute tsai, milk tea, though it was far from the sweet drink the name suggests. The leaves were boiled with water, milk, and sometimes a pinch of salt or butter. In the bitter winters, pieces of dried meat or grains might be added for strength. The tea was not merely a beverage. It was food, warmth, and comfort all in one. It filled the stomach, softened the cold, and steadied the spirit before long rides through the snow. The preparation of this tea was both simple and ceremonial. A woman of the household, often the matriarch, would rise before dawn. She would light the fire and set the iron pot upon it. As the water began to simmer, she would crush the tea leaves between her hands, mixing them with milk drawn from the family's mares or yaks. The scent that filled the yurt was thick and earthy, a blend of smoke, grass, and milk. The sound of the bubbling pot was the first comfort of the morning, a promise that the day would begin with warmth. Guests were always served first. To refuse a bowl of tea was unthinkable, an insult not only to the host but to the spirit of hospitality itself. The guest would take the bowl with both hands, bow slightly, and drink deeply. The warmth spread instantly, cutting through the chill that crept in from the plains. Conversation followed slowly, in quiet tones, often beginning with talk of weather, horses, and journeys. Among the Mongols, tea was a language of welcome, the first word spoken before any exchange of trade or alliance. As their empire expanded, the Mongols carried this habit wherever they went. Warriors drank tea before battle and after victory. Messengers crossing frozen rivers carried bricks of compressed tea as rations. Even in the grand halls of conquered cities, the Khans preferred their own strong brew over the delicate infusions of the lands they ruled. To them, tea was not a symbol of refinement, but of endurance. It represented the strength of those who could live where others could not. In the vastness of the steppe, where distances were measured in days and nights, tea connected the nomads to something constant. The land shifted, the sky changed, but the ritual remained. Each camp, each family, each fire, all began and ended with tea. The act of drinking together reinforced bonds that words alone could not. To share warmth was to share trust. Traders traveling through the Mongol territories soon learned that tea was not just another commodity, it was currency. Bricks of compressed tea were exchanged for wool, meat, and horses. Some were stamped with imperial seals, serving as both money and nourishment. A single brick could buy a goat or feed a soldier for a week. In this way, tea became part of the very economy of the empire, as essential as salt or iron. There was also belief woven into the drink. Some elders said that tea carried the blessing of the sun, captured when the leaves grew beneath open skies. Others believed it kept evil spirits at bay, for nothing unclean could enter a body warmed by tea. When someone died, a bowl was poured beside the fire, so that their spirit would not be thirsty on its journey. These customs gave the drink a sacred weight, turning every pot into an offering. When the Mongols met foreign merchants along the Silk Road, they traded their dense, salty brew for lighter teas from China and Tibet. Each encounter added a new variation, a new flavor, a new story. Yet even as the leaf changed, the spirit remained the same. The purpose was not elegance or ceremony. It was survival, strength, and connection. Tea was the heartbeat of the plains, pulsing through a people who never stood still. At night, after long rides beneath the cold stars, families gathered inside their tents. The fire glowed red, and the walls flickered with shadows. The children slept beside the horses' saddles, and the elders sat close to the flame. The last pot of tea boiled slowly, its surface trembling with heat. Outside, the wind moaned across the grasslands, but inside there was peace, a fragile, human warmth against the infinite dark. Each sip carried the same truth, that life was movement, and stillness could only be found in the shared silence of a bowl. Thus, in the world of the Mongols, tea became something raw and real. It was not an art or a philosophy, but a living thread between hunger and hope, between solitude and belonging. It carried no fragrance of refinement, yet it spoke with a power that all could understand. To drink it was to say, I am alive and I am not alone. When tea reached the Korean peninsula, it found a land shaped by mountains and sea, where the rhythm of life moved between stillness and song. The people who welcomed it were already a culture of balance between nature and craft, silence and expression. Here, tea would become neither medicine nor survival, but something in between, a quiet art of living. The first seeds arrived through monks returning from their studies in China, carrying small pouches of dried leaves and the teachings of calm. They planted tea bushes near temples, on slopes where morning mist lingered longest. The plants thrived in the cool, wet air. At first, tea was drunk mostly by monks, who used it to stay awake during meditation. But as centuries passed, the drink slipped beyond the temple walls and into the hearts of poets, scholars, and artisans. It began to mirror the Korean soul, modest, attentive, and deeply connected to nature. The earliest Korean tea gatherings were simple. A host would invite one or two guests, often in the early afternoon, when the light was soft and the wind gentle. The room would be quiet, open to the garden, with sliding doors that let in the scent of pine and earth. The table was low, the bowls plain, the movements slow. Nothing was hurried, nothing excessive. The host would heat the water, pour it over the leaves, and wait in silence. Conversation, if it came softly like a breeze, not a storm. In these early houses, tea was not a ceremony to be perfected, but a conversation with the moment. The host listened to the sound of boiling water, to the birds outside, to the rhythm of his own breath. The guest, watching, did the same. Time seemed to widen, as though the world had slowed to match the pace of the pouring. When the tea was finally served, it was not only a drink, but an act of presence. The Korean masters believed that tea revealed harmony through imperfection. A crack in a bowl, a faded glaze, a slightly uneven pour, all these were reminders that life itself was not flawless. They called this sensibility natural beauty, and it came to define their art. The goal was not control but balance. A host who moved too perfectly was seen as proud. A host who moved too carelessly was seen as thoughtless. The ideal was quiet grace, found somewhere in between. The materials of the tea house reflected this same humility. The floors were made of warm wood, the walls of paper that breathed with the wind. The cups were rough to the touch, handmade by local potters who believed that beauty belonged to the imperfect hand. The pot was small, barely enough for 3 cups, and the steam rising from it seemed to weave the air itself. Nothing stood out, yet everything belonged. Tea gatherings in Korea were often accompanied by poetry or calligraphy. After the first round of tea, the guest might take up a brush and write a few lines inspired by the moment, a reflection on the rain, a memory of spring, or a thought too light to speak aloud. These gestures were not performances, but gifts. They turned the tea table into a meeting of hearts. Words, when written in this way, were like the steam itself, appearing, fading, leaving behind warmth. The philosophy behind Korean tea culture was simple. To drink tea was to return to the center of oneself. There was a saying that became part of every gathering: tea and Zen share the same taste. It meant that wisdom was not found in thinking, but in awareness. The taste of tea, like the moment of peace, could not be forced or held. It had to be experienced and then released. In villages, tea houses began to appear along rivers and at the edges of markets. They were small, often just wooden huts with open windows and a single long table. Travelers would stop to rest, share tea, and exchange stories. These places became sanctuaries for weary hearts, halfway between the noise of the world and the quiet of solitude. There, people found community not through loudness, but through calm. During times of hardship or invasion, the tea houses endured. Even when temples were destroyed and courts fell silent, the act of brewing tea remained. It required no wealth, no elaborate tools, only leaves, water, and patience. The tea houses became symbols of resilience, their warmth defying the chaos outside. In that sense, they were more than buildings. They were reminders that peace can be built in small spaces. By the time tea became part of everyday Korean life, it had already taken on many shapes: meditation, nourishment, art, and hospitality. But what made it distinct here was the feeling it carried. Korean tea culture was not about precision or mastery. It was about gentleness, the ability to find stillness within movement. A cup of tea was not meant to impress, but to comfort. The sound of pouring water, the glow of light through paper walls, the faint rustle of leaves outside, all these were part of the same story. Even today, when one enters a traditional tea house in Seoul or Gyeongju, that same quiet spirit lingers. The air smells of roasted leaves, the wood creaks beneath bare feet, and every sip feels older than memory. For a moment, time softens, and the modern world fades. What remains is the same truth that guided the monks, poets, and travelers centuries ago, that peace is not something you find far away, but something you create, one cup at a time. When the ships of Portugal began to cross the Indian Ocean in the 16th century, they carried more than silk and spices. They carried curiosity. The sailors who reached the ports of China and Japan found a world unlike anything they had imagined: cities built on water, gardens of impossible beauty, and a drink that seemed to calm even the busiest minds. In the quiet courtyards of the East, they saw men and women sip from small cups of pale liquid. The steam rose slowly, and conversation flowed like the sea at dawn. The Portuguese did not yet know the word for it, but they remembered the scent, the color, and the strange peace that followed the first sip. The earliest records of tea in European hands come from the merchants and missionaries who traveled along those routes. They wrote of a leaf that was boiled in water to make a gentle drink, said to heal the stomach and clear the thoughts. At first, they treated it as a medicine, not a pleasure. Dried leaves were packed carefully into chests, carried aboard the ships that returned to Lisbon, and offered to nobles as a curiosity of the Orient. In those early years, tea was not yet known by its name. It was a whisper of another world. When the first samples arrived in Europe, they confused the senses. Some thought the leaves were herbs, others suspected they were for burning, like incense. Apothecaries sold them beside cinnamon, clove, and pepper. Physicians prescribed them in small doses, claiming they balanced the humors and lifted the spirits. No one yet imagined that the drink would one day become a comfort more familiar than wine. It remained rare, mysterious, and faintly magical, a foreign secret caught between superstition and science. Those who had tasted tea in the East described it with awe. They spoke of its fragrance, its purity, and the calm it brought. Yet when they tried to reproduce it in Europe, something was lost. The water was different, the vessels unfamiliar, the air too heavy. The first brews were often bitter or weak. The delicate art of preparation, which had taken centuries to refine in Asia, did not travel easily. Still, the idea of tea, its grace, its simplicity, began to capture the imagination of those who had never seen it. In the great houses of Lisbon and Seville, tea became a luxury shared among explorers and scholars. They drank it from porcelain cups brought over the same seas that carried the leaf itself. These cups were treasures, smooth, white, and strong, unlike anything made in Europe. Their surfaces reflected candlelight like still water. To hold such an object, to taste such a drink, was to touch the edges of another civilization. For a few moments, the world felt larger and more connected. Missionaries returning from China wrote long letters describing how tea was served during meetings with scholars and officials. They noted the politeness, the precision, and the sense of peace that surrounded the ritual. To them, it was not only a drink but a reflection of an entire philosophy, the belief that grace could be found in small acts, that peace could be poured like water. These letters spread through Europe, fueling both fascination and envy. Monarchs and merchants wanted to know the secret of this drink that seemed to unite elegance and humility. At first, tea was too expensive for most Europeans. Only the wealthy could afford the rare shipments that arrived from Macau or Nagasaki. A small chest of tea could cost as much as silver. Servants guarded the supply with care, and it was locked away in cabinets like treasure. Yet, even among the privileged, there was confusion about how to drink it. Some boiled the leaves too long. Others mixed them with wine, milk, or sugar in strange experiments. The flavor was unfamiliar, but the mystery made it irresistible. In time, tea began to take root not only as a drink, but as an idea. It represented the East refined, balanced, and quietly powerful. For sailors who had crossed half the world, it became a memory of calm after storms. For nobles in Europe, it became a symbol of knowledge and worldliness. To hold a cup of tea was to show that one had seen beyond the horizon. It was not just taste that they pursued, but connection. As more ships sailed eastward, carrying missionaries and merchants, the flow of tea grew stronger. The Portuguese did not yet dominate the trade, but they opened the door through which others would soon pass: the Dutch, the English, the French. Each would take their turn shaping the destiny of the leaf. But it was the Portuguese who first brought back the scent of that distant world, the first to let Europe taste the silence of the East. By the end of the century, tea had become a quiet presence in European ports. It was not yet fashionable, but it had begun its long journey into daily life. The sailors who once feared the unknown now carried a little calm wherever they went, a handful of leaves that turned boiling water into something soft and human. In this way, the meeting of worlds began not with conquest, but with a cup shared between strangers who could not speak the same language. Tea had crossed oceans as it once crossed mountains, gently, persistently, and without a sound. When the Dutch ships began to follow the Portuguese across the seas, the world of trade shifted. Their vessels were faster, their ambition greater, and their hunger for the riches of the East endless. In their holds, they carried spices, silk, porcelain, and something new that few yet understood: tea. What had begun as a whisper in Lisbon now became a rising murmur in Amsterdam and London, carried by men who measured the world not by distance, but by profit. The Dutch were merchants of precision. They saw what others overlooked. In the quiet leaves packed into clay jars, they recognized not a curiosity but a future. To them, tea was a product with no equal light to transport, long to preserve, and endlessly appealing to those who could afford to be curious. They began to buy it in quantity from the Chinese ports of Canton and the Japanese port of Nagasaki, trading silver and textiles for the fragile green treasure. Soon their ships returned home with cargoes that smelled faintly of grass and smoke, the scent of lands that most Europeans would never see. When tea first arrived in the Netherlands, it was a novelty among the wealthy. Amsterdam's finest houses hosted gatherings where guests were invited to watch the strange ritual of brewing. Porcelain cups were displayed like jewels, and the servants who poured the water did so with exaggerated care. Each movement was slow, deliberate, foreign. The taste was soft, almost too gentle for palates used to wine and ale, yet that very gentleness became its charm. Tea was not for thirst, it was for conversation, for pause, for grace. It was the drink of those who had time to be still. As demand grew, the Dutch East India Company, the powerful trading empire that linked Asia and Europe, began to control the flow of tea. The company's records mention the leaf as early as the 1600s, describing it as both medicine and luxury. Prices were high, but so was fascination. The rich wanted tea not only for its flavor, but for what it represented: refinement, worldliness, and connection to the mysteries of the Orient. A single cup became a statement proof that one belonged to the new, global age. Soon, England took notice. The English merchants, always alert to opportunity, began to import tea through Dutch intermediaries. In London, the drink found a home among the aristocracy. It arrived at tables already laden with silver spoons and sugar, its pale color glowing under candlelight. Unlike the loud clinking of wine glasses, tea brought a softer sound, the whisper of porcelain, the murmur of water, the quiet laughter of guests who lingered longer than intended. Tea turned conversation into ceremony and made stillness fashionable. The rise of tea created new worlds of business. In Amsterdam and London, auctions were held where traders bid for chests of tea brought in by the great East India fleets. These auctions were events of spectacle and tension. The warehouses were filled with the smell of distant rain and dry leaves. Merchants examined the chests, breaking small samples to judge the color, the cut, and the scent. Some varieties were rare and fetched extraordinary prices. Others were blended, diluted, and sold to taverns for the common people. Every leaf was weighed, every ounce recorded. In the quiet competition of commerce, tea became both object and obsession. The auctions were more than markets. They were the heartbeat of empires. From these rooms, fortunes were made and lost. Investors waited in crowded halls, their breaths held as the auctioneer's voice echoed against wooden walls. A single nod could buy enough tea to fill a ship, and each ship, when it left again for the East, carried not only silver but the promise of more. The trade in tea became a symbol of global reach, a visible thread linking the fog of London to the ports of Canton and Calcutta. As tea grew common among the upper classes, it began to shape daily life. Morning tea became a ritual in itself, followed by the afternoon gatherings that would later define English culture. Furniture changed to accommodate it: low tables, delicate trays, fine cups. Artists painted scenes of tea drinking as emblems of taste and domestic virtue. Even fashion followed suit, with gowns designed to match the calm elegance of the drawing room. Through tea, refinement became a habit, not a performance. But not all saw it kindly. Some church leaders warned that tea encouraged idleness, that it lured people into useless talk. Tavern owners feared it would replace ale. Yet the drink continued to spread, one cup at a time. Its quiet power was stronger than any protest. It needed no argument, no advertisement. It simply waited, and those who tasted it understood. By the end of the 17th century, tea was no longer rare. It had crossed oceans, shaped economies, and redefined what it meant to be civilized. The Dutch had made it possible, and the English would make it permanent. What had once been a humble leaf now carried the weight of nations. In every port where the ships docked, the smell of tea marked both the promise of profit and the memory of peace. The auctions continued, year after year, until they became rituals of their own, a worldly echo of the ceremonies that had begun long ago in the quiet monasteries of the East. And as the last hammer struck and the warehouse doors closed, a new journey began from merchant to table, from curiosity to comfort, from trade to tradition. By the time the 18th century dawned, tea had taken root in Britain as something far greater than a luxury. It had become a habit, a comfort, and, soon, a national identity. What began as a curiosity of the East was now a symbol of home, refinement, and moral order. The British, ever practical and ritual-minded, turned the drinking of tea into a ceremony of everyday life, one that shaped their culture, their commerce, and even their sense of who they were. At first, tea remained a privilege of the wealthy. Its price was high, and its import tightly controlled by the British East India Company. Chests of tea arrived in London docks under guard, marked with seals and serial numbers as though they contained treasure. Merchants and noble families paid dearly for it, locking their supplies in ornate wooden boxes to prevent theft by curious servants. Yet despite its cost, the taste of tea began to spread downward, cup by cup, into the homes of clerks, shopkeepers, and servants. It moved the way most great ideas do quietly, by imitation and longing. In the grand drawing rooms of Georgian society, tea became the center of social grace. The act of offering it was an expression of civility and control. A well-set tea table reflected the order of a well-run home, the polished silver spoons, the delicate porcelain, the crisp linen. To pour tea gracefully was to demonstrate poise. To receive it politely was to show good breeding. Conversation flowed in soft tones, never hurried, never crude. Tea gatherings became the theater of manners, where every gesture was a performance of refinement. But beyond the parlors of the elite, tea was transforming the lives of ordinary people. The Industrial Revolution was stirring the cities, and workers faced long hours in dim factories. Tea, cheapened by mass import, became their salvation. It was warm, safe to drink, and comforting after exhaustion. Unlike ale, it sharpened the mind instead of clouding it. Employers even encouraged tea breaks, believing that the drink made their workers more alert and more obedient. In this way, tea quietly replaced alcohol as the social fuel of the working class. It became not only the drink of the rich, but the strength of the poor. This dual nature, elegance above, endurance below, made tea the most unifying force in Britain. It was both luxury and necessity, both art and habit. A duchess and a dock worker could share the same taste, the same warmth, the same sigh after a long day. Few things in human history have erased class lines so subtly. The tea table, whether marble or wood, became the one place where silence could mean equality. The obsession grew. Entire industries rose around the drink. Merchants built fortunes importing tea from China. Craftsmen designed teapots, cups, and strainers with endless variation. Artists painted scenes of tea gardens, sunlit parlors, and families gathered around the evening kettle. Poets wrote of the quiet comfort of a cup held between weary hands. The very sound of water boiling began to carry emotional weight, the promise of rest, of safety, of belonging. It was not only the drink itself that changed Britain, but what surrounded it. The craving for sugar to sweeten tea drove the expansion of plantations in the Caribbean, shaping colonial economies and dark histories alike. The need for faster trade routes pushed engineers to design faster ships, stronger harbors, and new canals. Every cup poured in London rippled through the farthest corners of the empire. Tea connected the domestic to the global, the personal to the political. Afternoon tea soon became a formal institution. The story goes that Anna, Duchess of Bedford, began the custom of taking tea and light food in the late afternoon to bridge the long gap between lunch and dinner. Others imitated her, and before long, every respectable household in England had its own version of the ritual. The menu grew sandwiches, scones, cream, and delicate pastries, but the heart of it remained the same, a pause in the day, a moment of grace. It was, in its way, a continuation of the same calm that monks had found centuries before in faraway temples. The British, without realizing it, had inherited that peace and made it their own. In literature and art, tea became shorthand for comfort and morality. A cup offered to a guest meant friendship. A shared pot at the hearth meant unity. Even in times of war and scarcity, tea remained a constant. Soldiers carried it in their packs, families rationed it with reverence. When bombs fell during the darkest nights of the 20th century, kettles still boiled. The sound was defiance in disguise, the will to remain human. By the height of the Victorian era, tea was no longer foreign. It was Britain itself, distilled. To be English was to drink tea in joy, in grief, in solitude, in company. The leaf that had crossed mountains and seas now belonged to fog and hearth, to rain and rest. And though the world had changed around it, the essence of tea remained unchanged, a small ritual of calm in a restless age. Even now, when a British hand lifts a cup, there is a whisper of all the centuries behind it, of monks and traders, of workers and queens, of silence carried across oceans. The obsession with tea was never just about taste. It was about finding order in the storm, a quiet center in the noise of empire. And in that small act of lifting a cup, the British found what all seekers of tea had found before them, a reason to pause, to breathe, and to remember that peace, like warmth, is meant to be shared. By the middle of the 18th century, tea had become the most ordinary luxury in the British Empire, so common that even its colonies could not imagine life without it. In cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, the smell of steeped leaves drifted through every street. Merchants sold it by the pound, taverns served it to travelers, and families gathered around their kettles just as they did in London. A shared cup of tea had come to mean civilization, connection, and comfort. But in the colonies, that same cup was about to become something else, a symbol of anger, identity, and the quiet beginning of a storm. For years, the colonies had lived under the distant hand of British rule, their voices heard but not heeded. Taxes rose, trade laws tightened, and resentment brewed as steadily as the tea in every home. When Parliament passed the Tea Act of 1773, granting the British East India Company exclusive rights to sell tea directly to the colonies, it seemed a small matter at first. The price of tea would fall, not rise. But the colonists saw more than numbers. They saw control. The act was not about tea. It was about obedience. In Boston, anger simmered beneath the surface. Men who had long drunk their tea with sugar now tasted bitterness. The idea of paying taxes to a distant king for a product they could neither regulate nor refuse struck at the heart of their pride. Meetings were held in taverns and churches, where words like liberty and tyranny began to fill the air. Pamphlets circulated, urging boycott and resistance. Yet even among the rebels, the irony was clear. They fought against oppression while clutching the very drink that had come to symbolize British grace. When the East India Company's ships finally arrived in the harbor, carrying hundreds of chests of tea, the city held its breath. The governor insisted the cargo be unloaded and the tax paid. The citizens, organized under the name Sons of Liberty, refused. For days, the ships sat idle, trapped between law and conscience, between empire and rebellion. The winter air grew colder, the water darker. Every kettle in Boston boiled with anticipation. Then came the night of December 16. A crowd gathered at the Old South Meeting House, men dressed as laborers, sailors, and apprentices. Their discussions were loud, their tempers sharper than the wind. Finally, as candles flickered low, a voice shouted, "This meeting can do no more to save the country." It was the signal. The crowd moved swiftly through the streets toward the harbor, their footsteps muffled by snow. Some had disguised themselves with feathers and paint, a symbolic gesture of defiance. They boarded the ships under moonlight, their breath forming clouds in the frozen air. What happened next was not chaos, but order, the same kind of order that tea itself once represented. The men worked silently, methodically. They broke open the chests and poured the tea into the water. Not a single person was harmed, and no other cargo was touched. The harbor filled with the scent of leaves and salt. The tea spread like ink across the Black Sea, staining the night with its quiet rebellion. In that silence, something changed. The colonists had not merely destroyed a shipment, they had made a declaration that their peace was their own to choose. The British government saw it differently. To them, it was not a message, but a provocation. Retaliation was swift. The ports were closed, soldiers sent, and laws tightened. Yet the act of defiance had already taken root. Across the colonies, the image of tea spilling into the water became legend. It was a paradox made visible, rebellion expressed through the destruction of calm. Tea, once a symbol of civility, had become the instrument of freedom. In the years that followed, war would come, and the taste of tea would change again. Many colonists swore it off entirely, calling it the drink of tyranny. They turned instead to coffee, a darker, stronger brew that seemed to match the new nation's defiant spirit. Yet the memory of that night never faded. It was told again and again how ordinary men, armed with nothing more than conviction, had stood against an empire, and how the softest leaf had become the loudest voice. There was irony in it all. The same drink that had crossed oceans to bring peace between cultures now marked the beginning of a struggle that would divide them. The same ritual that had united drawing rooms from London to Boston now revealed the fragile line between comfort and control. Tea had always carried two meanings, rest and reflection, and now it carried a third, resistance. When dawn rose over Boston Harbor the next morning, the water was calm again, but its color was strange. The surface shimmered with the faint hue of amber, as if the harbor itself had steeped overnight. The ships stood still, their decks empty. The city was quiet, waiting for what would come. Somewhere, perhaps in a nearby house, a kettle still boiled. Someone poured a cup and stared out at the sea, tasting the bitterness of history and the warmth of courage at once. In that single night, tea had become more than a drink. It had become a story, one of order turned into chaos, of silence turned into defiance. And though the leaves had sunk beneath the water, their meaning would rise again, traveling far beyond the harbor, across time and memory, carrying the taste of freedom in every sip. Long before it became a symbol of nations, a companion of thinkers, or the center of rebellion. Tea was simply a plant, small, green, and patient. Its name, in the language of science, is Camellia sinensis, a modest evergreen shrub that grows quietly on the slopes of warm, mist-covered hills. It does not demand attention. Its flowers are white and shy, its leaves soft and narrow, its roots thin but deep, and yet, in its stillness, it holds the story of thousands of years and millions of lives. In the wild, the tea plant thrives in places where clouds linger close to the ground. It loves humidity, gentle rain, and filtered sunlight. Too much cold, and it sleeps. Too much heat, and it wilts. The best leaves come from plants that live between worlds, not in the valley, not on the peak, but somewhere in between. There, the air is cool and alive, filled with mist that softens everything it touches. The farmers who tend these plants often say that the fog itself becomes part of the leaf. When you drink it, you taste the weather. Each leaf of the Camellia sinensis carries layers of memory. Its thin veins hold the water of the soil, the minerals of the mountain, and the rhythm of the sun. The plant does not grow fast. It takes years for a tea bush to mature enough to harvest, and even then, the picking must be done by hand. Workers rise before dawn, moving slowly through the rows, choosing only the youngest leaves, the small, tender buds that curl at the top. These are called the 2 leaves and a bud, the perfect combination of youth and promise. The work is delicate, too rough a touch, and the leaf bruises, releasing bitterness. Too quick a pace, and the plant suffers. The best tea pickers learn the motion as if it were a kind of dance, a twist, a pull, a release. The baskets fill with green, the air with scent. When the morning fog begins to lift, the fields shimmer with dew, and the workers pause to stretch their backs and look at the sky. It is quiet work, but never lonely. The sound of rustling leaves becomes its own kind of song. Once harvested, the leaves begin a transformation that mirrors the complexity of life itself. They are spread out to wither, allowing the moisture to escape. Then they are rolled, twisted, or sometimes pressed, depending on the tea they will become. The enzymes inside react with air, changing color from green to brown, deepening the aroma. In this process, nature and human touch work together, a partnership of patience and skill. The same plant, treated differently, becomes many things: green tea, black tea, oolong, or white. The difference lies not in what it is, but in how it is allowed to breathe. The farmers who work with tea often speak to their plants. They do not command them, but thank them. They believe the leaf responds to kindness, that a gentle hand yields a better harvest. Science may not agree, but the belief persists that something in the relationship between grower and plant shapes the final taste. Perhaps it is true. Perhaps the plant remembers. In the stillness of a tea garden, time feels slower. The rows of bushes stretch like waves across the hills, their tops shining in the soft light. In the distance, a temple bell might sound, carried by the wind. The workers pause, listening, and then continue. Every movement has purpose. Every gesture carries the memory of generations who have done the same. A visitor watching from afar might not understand the devotion it takes to tend such fragile life. But for those who live among the plants, the work is a meditation, a dialogue between earth and hand. The Camellia sinensis is resilient, yet sensitive. It can live for decades, even centuries, if cared for. Some tea gardens still harvest from bushes planted hundreds of years ago. Their roots have intertwined with stones, their trunks thick and gnarled like old bones. They have survived droughts, wars, and changing empires, and still, each spring, they send out new leaves, soft and green, as if nothing in the world could stop them. Scientists classify the plant, analyze its chemicals, and chart its varieties. They can describe the caffeine, the tannins, and the antioxidants. But what cannot be measured is the feeling that arises when one stands in a tea field at dawn, the sense that the land itself is breathing. Each leaf is alive, yet silent. It asks for nothing, but gives endlessly. Every cup of tea begins with this humble leaf. Every story, every ritual, every comfort starts in its quiet persistence. It does not know the hands that will hold it, nor the history it will shape. It only knows how to grow, how to reach for light, how to be transformed. The journey from leaf to cup may be long, but it always begins the same way, with a single green bud trembling in the wind, waiting to be seen. In that waiting lies the essence of tea. It teaches that patience is not emptiness, but readiness, that stillness is not absence, but presence. The Camellia sinensis does not rush, it listens, it endures, and in doing so, it offers a lesson older than any civilization, that peace, like growth, comes quietly, one leaf at a time. When the season of harvest arrives, the tea fields wake before the sun. A silver mist drifts low over the bushes, carrying the cool breath of dawn. The workers move quietly through the rows, their steps soft on the damp soil. Each carries a woven basket, worn smooth by years of use. The air smells of rain and green life, sharp and clean. The mountains echo with the faint rustle of hands among leaves, a rhythm older than memory. Harvesting tea is not a task of speed, but of attention. The best leaves are picked at the moment between youth and maturity, when the buds are tender but not fragile. Too early, and the flavor is thin. Too late, and the spirit of the leaf has already passed. The farmers know this not from books, but from years of watching the plants. They feel the time to pick in their bones, guided by wind, weather, and instinct. There are no clocks in the tea fields, only light. Each picker moves with quiet precision. The hand reaches out, twists, and releases a motion learned through repetition until it becomes almost invisible. The leaves fall softly into the basket, their faint crackle blending with the hum of insects. Conversation is minimal, often just a nod or a whisper. In these fields, silence is not emptiness. It is respect for the plants, for the work, for the moment itself. As the sun climbs higher, the baskets fill. They are carried to the edge of the field, where long mats or bamboo trays wait. The fresh leaves are spread out thinly to wither. This is the first transformation, when nature begins to give way to craft. The leaves lie still, releasing their moisture, their bright color fading to a softer green. The air around them warms, and a faint sweetness rises, the smell of life turning gently toward change. Withering can take hours or days, depending on the weather. The farmers watch closely, touching the leaves, listening to the faint sound they make when handled. When they reach the perfect softness, neither wet nor dry, the next stage begins, rolling. This is where the leaf learns its final shape, guided by human hands. Rolling is an art that demands both strength and tenderness. In some regions it is done by hand, in others by wooden or stone rollers. The purpose is simple: to bruise the leaf just enough to let its inner juices meet the air. The act awakens the flavors within. The workers press, twist, and knead the leaves until they glisten with tiny drops of moisture. The smell deepens, no longer just green, but earthy, floral, and faintly sweet. It is the scent of transformation. During rolling, the room fills with sound, the soft squeak of wood, the whisper of hands, the murmur of voices. The rhythm is steady and meditative, like a heartbeat. Those who have done it for years move without thought, their bodies remembering what their minds no longer need to command. The work is physical, but it carries an inner calm. The rolling of tea is not only a craft, it is a dialogue between patience and purpose. After rolling, the leaves must be dried. They are spread again, this time over low heat, in pans or over charcoal fires. The heat must be gentle, never scorching. Too much fire, and the soul of the leaf is lost. Too little, and the moisture lingers, spoiling the batch. The masters of tea learn to read the temperature not with thermometers, but with their palms. They hover their hands above the pan, sensing the warmth, adjusting the flame by instinct. It is a partnership with the element of fire, one built on respect, not control. As the leaves dry, their color darkens. The texture becomes crisp, the scent rich and layered. Green tea remains light, dried quickly to preserve its freshness. Black tea is allowed to oxidize longer, deepening its hue and strength. Oolong lies somewhere in between, a balance between the two worlds. All of this happens in the same room, under the same roof, guided by the same hands. The difference lies only in the rhythm: when to stop, when to wait, when to let go. When the final drying is done, the leaves rest. The workers gather around the tables, rubbing a few between their fingers, listening to the soft crackle that tells them the job is complete. There is pride in that sound. It means the harvest has been honored. The farmers drink the first cup from the new leaves in silence, tasting their own labor in the water. The flavor is not just of soil and plant, but of time and care. Outside, the sun begins to set. The air grows cooler, and the fields lie quiet again. The same bushes that gave their leaves now stand empty, their energy returned to the roots. They will sleep until the next season calls them. The workers wash their hands, their skin stained faintly green. They have shaped something transient into something lasting, turning a living leaf into memory. Every cup of tea, no matter where it is poured, carries the trace of these moments, the touch of human fingers, the scent of morning mist, the breath of fire and air. The world drinks the calm of many hands working in rhythm with nature. In that rhythm lies the true craft of tea, a reminder that creation is never about haste, but about harmony. From a single plant, countless flavors are born. The leaf of the Camellia sinensis is always the same, delicate, bright, and filled with quiet potential, yet the way it meets air, fire, and time creates worlds of difference. In one place, the leaf remains fresh and vibrant, its taste crisp and grassy. In another, it darkens and deepens, its aroma rich and earthy. Between these two lies a vast middle ground, where balance becomes art. Green, black, and oolong are not separate species, but separate interpretations of patience. Green tea is the closest to the living leaf. It is the moment before change, the memory of spring held in water. To make it, the leaves are heated soon after harvest, either steamed, as in Japan, or pan-fired, as in China, halting the natural process of oxidation. The goal is to preserve the vitality, the taste of raw life. The steam rises like morning fog, and the scent is that of new growth. The leaves remain bright, the flavor sharp but pure. When brewed, the cup glows pale gold or jade green, and the taste lingers like the first breath of dawn. Drinking green tea is like listening to silence. It asks nothing of the drinker but presence. The Japanese masters often say that green tea is the taste of attention, fleeting, delicate, and easily lost. The smallest mistake in temperature or timing can ruin it, turning clarity into bitterness, but when done well, it carries a freshness that feels almost alive, a whisper of leaves rustling in the wind. To drink it is to remember that perfection lies in restraint. Black tea, by contrast, is a journey completed. It is the leaf after it has met the air, after it has surrendered its greenness to time. Once the leaves are rolled and exposed to oxygen, they begin to transform, their color deepening, their aroma expanding into notes of fruit, wood, and smoke. The process is called oxidation, though those who love tea prefer a gentler word, fermentation of spirit. The leaves are then dried, sealing their new identity. The result is a drink darker in color and stronger in presence, a tea that comforts like an old story told beside the fire. Black tea has the weight of memory. It is less about freshness and more about depth. Its strength lies in the harmony of opposites, warmth and bitterness, sweetness and earth. It is the taste of completion, the wisdom that follows experience. In the great tea gardens of India and Sri Lanka, the scent of black tea fills the morning air. Workers carry baskets heavy with leaves that will become Assam, Darjeeling, or Ceylon, names that once belonged to places, now to flavors. Each carries a hint of its landscape, the rain, the soil, the altitude. To drink black tea is to taste distance. Between these two worlds lies oolong, the middle path, the art of balance. Neither fully green nor fully black, it is the embodiment of impermanence. The leaves are partially oxidized, watched carefully by masters who decide, by sight and scent alone, when to stop the process. There is no rule, no machine that can measure the perfect moment, only experience, intuition, and breath. When the leaves reach that invisible line, they are fired to hold the flavor where it stands half light, half shadow. Oolong is the tea of paradox. It holds both freshness and depth, sweetness and smoke. Every sip feels different, as if the cup itself is alive. The Chinese poets once called it the tea of clouds, because its taste drifts and changes, never settling. In the mountains of Fujian, where oolong was first made, the process is treated almost like a conversation between the maker and the leaf. Too much fire, and the soul of the tea retreats. Too little, and it never wakes. To make good oolong, one must listen more than act. Each type of tea reflects a different philosophy of time. Green tea resists it, striving to hold on to youth. Black tea accepts it, embracing maturity and stillness. Oolong dances with it, moving between both worlds. In this way, the teas mirror human life, our own seasons of growth, change, and rest. What we call flavor is really transformation made visible. The beauty of tea lies in this truth, that difference comes not from what we are given, but from how we choose to meet it. The same leaf, treated with patience or haste, becomes something new. Every decision, how long to wither, how much to roll, when to fire, changes its future. The leaf teaches that small choices shape everything. When the drinker lifts a cup of green tea, he tastes the edge of spring. When he lifts a cup of black tea, he tastes the end of autumn. When he drinks oolong, he stands between them in the season that cannot be named. The three together form a conversation between moments, a reminder that no state of being lasts forever. And yet, in every cup, there is a common thread, the same plant, the same hand, the same need for warmth. The diversity of tea is not a sign of division but of unity. It shows that harmony is not sameness, but coexistence. Each path, whether green, black, or oolong, leads to the same place: stillness. When the pot is empty and the steam fades, what remains is not the taste, but the feeling, a quiet awareness that transformation, though constant, can be gentle. The leaf that once fluttered in the wind has crossed fire, air, and time, only to return to water, and when we drink it, we complete its journey. When all the work of the fields and the hands is done, what remains is the quiet act of brewing. After months of growth, weeks of harvest, and hours of careful rolling and drying, the tea meets its purpose in the simplest way by touching water again. The leaf, once alive in the soil, once kissed by the fire, now awakens in the heat of a cup. Its journey ends where ours begins. The kettle is the heart of the ritual. Its voice fills the room before any word is spoken. The sound of boiling water is both familiar and ancient, a steady hum that seems to come from within the earth itself. Steam curls upward, twisting in slow patterns that vanish before they are complete. Watching it feels like watching time made visible. The water bubbles, restless and alive, waiting to be guided. It is heat tamed into harmony, energy transformed into calm. The vessel chosen for the tea depends on culture and mood. In China, the teapot is small, round, and made of clay that remembers every brew. In Japan, it is simple and open, designed to honor clarity. In Britain, it gleams in porcelain, carrying echoes of conversation and comfort. Yet in every form, the purpose is the same: to hold warmth and release it slowly. The material, like the leaf, matters less than the intention. As the water is poured, the world narrows to sound and sight. The hiss of liquid meeting leaves, the faint clink of the lid, the whisper of steam rising, each detail becomes its own kind of music. The person who pours moves carefully, not as a performer, but as a listener. The goal is not to master the ritual, but to follow it. In that following, one finds stillness. The steam carries stories. Its scent is never quite the same, for no two moments are ever the same. Some brews smell of flowers, others of wood or rain. Some linger, others vanish almost immediately. The air becomes part of the tea, filling the room with a softness that cannot be touched but can be felt. Breathing it in is like stepping into memory, one that does not belong to you but feels familiar nonetheless. When the time comes to pour, everything slows. The stream of tea leaves the pot in a thin golden arc, clear at first, then deepening as it fills the cup. The hand tilts gently, steady and sure. The sound of the pour is quiet but powerful, a whisper of gratitude, a small confession of care. In that moment, the tea reveals its character. The color deepens, the surface shimmers, and for a heartbeat, the world seems perfectly still. Those who study tea often say that the first pour belongs to the eyes. It is the color that prepares the mind. The second belongs to the nose, the scent that opens memory. Only the third belongs to the tongue, the taste that completes the experience. To rush through these stages is to lose what tea has always tried to teach: patience, awareness, and surrender. When the cup is lifted, it warms the hands first. The fingers feel the smoothness of the porcelain or the roughness of clay. The warmth seeps into the skin, loosening the body's quiet tensions. Then comes the scent, faint, layered, infinite. It invites you to breathe, to close your eyes, to remember that you are here. Only then do you sip, and the liquid touches your tongue. For a moment, the entire world becomes taste light, heat, and memory intertwined. Every culture has its own way of describing that moment. In Japan, it is the instant of ichigo ichi, one encounter, one opportunity, never to be repeated. In China, it is the return of harmony, the reunion of water and leaf. In the West, it is simply comfort, different words, same truth. A sip of tea is a meeting with the present, an acceptance of what is and what will pass. Even the cooling of the tea is part of its story. At first, it is too hot to drink freely, forcing you to wait. Then it becomes perfect, and then, inevitably, it fades. Each stage carries its own beauty. To drink too fast is to miss the transitions, the same lesson the leaf learned when meeting air and fire. Life, too, is a sequence of temperatures, and wisdom lies in knowing how to savor each one. In the quiet after the last sip, a stillness fills the space. The steam has vanished, The cup sits empty, but something remains, a residue of calm, a pause in the endless movement of thought. That is the gift of tea. It is not in the taste, or even in the warmth, but in the silence that follows. The empty cup becomes a mirror of the self, simple, open, waiting to be filled again. Outside, the day continues as always. People hurry, voices rise, clocks tick, but for the one who has poured, who has waited, who has breathed in steam and let it go, time feels different. The noise of the world no longer bites, it hums. The pulse slows, the shoulders loosen. The tea has done what it was always meant to do, to turn water into peace and peace into habit. When the cup is set down and the last trace of warmth fades from the hands, the lesson remains. All things begin, transform, and end, only to begin again. The leaf knows this, the water knows this, and now, so does the drinker. For all its solitude and quiet, tea has always been a companion. It was never meant to be kept to oneself alone. The warmth of the cup, the gentle sound of water being poured, the shared silence between two people, these are the true language of tea. Long before books were written about it, long before ceremonies and trade, the first drinkers understood this truth instinctively. Tea was not just a taste, it was a meeting. Across centuries and cultures, tea has been the backdrop of friendship. In the villages of China, neighbors would knock softly at each other's doors, not to announce, but to arrive. A pot of tea would already be waiting, its steam rising like a welcome. There was no need for formality. The act itself carried meaning. To offer tea was to say, "You are safe here." To accept it was to answer, "I will stay a while." No contract or confession could build trust as strongly as a shared pot. In Japan, this companionship became art. The host and guest bowed to one another, aware that the encounter was unique and unrepeatable. They did not speak of business or worry. They spoke through movement, through the careful whisking of powder, the slow raising of the cup, the respectful silence after each sip. The words between them were few, but the understanding was deep. In that space of quiet, two minds could meet without struggle. In the deserts of Mongolia, tea took a different form but served the same purpose. A traveler arriving from a long journey would always be greeted with a bowl of hot, milky tea. The host might not know his name, but the act of offering warmth across the cold steppe was enough to make him kin for the night. Stories would follow, tales of roads and storms, of horses and trade. The fire would crackle, the tea would steam, and for a few hours, the endless land outside would feel smaller. The same scene unfolded in Europe centuries later. A visitor entering a home was almost always offered tea before anything else. It was both courtesy and invitation. In drawing rooms and cottages alike, the kettle became the center of hospitality. The host's care in brewing the perfect cup was a way of saying, "You matter." For the guest, the acceptance of the cup was a quiet acknowledgement of gratitude. Through tea, class, culture, and distance softened. It was one of the few rituals that required no wealth, only warmth. Writers have long understood the power of that warmth. In countless letters and novels, tea appears as a symbol of friendship and refuge. When characters share tea, they share understanding. It is the pause in the storm, the gentle bridge between souls. Even in conflict, a cup of tea has the ability to disarm. To sit together, to pour for one another, is to admit that connection still exists. In many Eastern philosophies, tea represents the ideal of harmony not just between people, but between people and the moment they inhabit. When two sit together with tea, the space between them becomes sacred. The steam rising from the pot fills the air like unspoken words. Conversation flows naturally, but it is not needed. Even silence feels alive, shaped by the shared rhythm of sipping and breathing. There is something profoundly human in that simplicity. Modern life often rushes forward, demanding attention and noise, but tea resists all that. It insists on presence. When you drink tea with another person, you slow down, the world outside recedes. The table, the cups, the sound of boiling water, these small details form a world within a world, one built entirely from attention and kindness. In many cultures, the way tea is shared reveals what kind of relationship exists. A first meeting might call for careful politeness, small cups, quiet voices. Among close friends, the gestures loosen. The host pours more freely. The guest lifts the pot without waiting for permission. In old Chinese sayings, it is written that true friendship is when two can drink tea without speaking. It means that comfort has replaced performance, and sincerity has replaced form. Even in grief, tea remains. When someone dies, a pot may be placed by the body, a final offering of warmth for the journey ahead. When those left behind gather, they often drink together, not to celebrate, but to remember. The act of pouring becomes a way to fill the silence that loss creates. Tea, in those moments, is the hand that steadies trembling hearts. In times of joy, too, it stands at the center. Weddings, births, homecomings, each is marked by the boiling of water and the sound of cups touching. Across centuries, no language, religion, or empire has ever owned this gesture. It belongs to everyone who has ever reached for another human being in kindness. Perhaps that is why tea has endured when other traditions have faded. It does not require belief, wealth, or ceremony. It requires only the willingness to share warmth. A single pot can turn strangers into friends, enemies into guests, silence into peace. It is not the leaf that creates companionship, but the pause it offers, the moment in which both people breathe the same air and feel the same heat in their hands. In the end, every friendship, every act of compassion is a kind of tea poured, offered, and accepted. It is fleeting but real, fragile but powerful, and long after the cups are empty, the feeling remains, soft and quiet, like steam fading into the air. There are times when tea is not meant to be shared, when the day stretches too long, when thoughts crowd the mind, or when the noise of the world presses too close. Tea becomes a companion of solitude. It waits quietly, asking for nothing but stillness. A single cup, a little steam, a slow breath, these can be enough to remind a person that peace is not found in the absence of others, but in the presence of oneself. In the quiet hours before dawn, when even the streets seem to hold their breath, the act of making tea can feel sacred. The water begins to warm, and its soft murmur fills the silence. The body moves on instinct, filling the kettle, choosing the cup, measuring the leaves. There is no rush, no purpose beyond the doing itself. The mind begins to follow the rhythm of small actions, each one simple and complete. The clutter of thought slowly falls away. The world outside might be restless, but the world within the room becomes still. Steam rises and curls in the dim light, fragile and slow. Watching it feels like watching one's own thoughts drift and dissolve. The warmth of the cup seeps into the hands, into the pulse, into the chest. It is a small comfort, but a real one. In that moment, tea becomes more than drink. It becomes breath, heartbeat, and pause. Solitude often frightens people because it feels like emptiness. But tea teaches that emptiness is not loneliness, it is space. Space to listen, to rest, to remember. When one sits alone with tea, there is no performance, no need to fill the air with words. The self that so often hides behind noise begins to appear. the act of sipping becomes an act of seeing. You notice the shape of the cup, the sound of your own breath, the faint ticking of the clock, the echo of your thoughts as they rise and fade. Writers and monks have long understood this. Many of them built their lives around this kind of solitude, not isolation, but contemplation. They drank tea while they wrote, while they prayed, while they watched the rain. For them, the cup was not escape but anchor. It reminded them that time could move without rushing, that life could unfold without demand. The first sip calmed the heart, the second clarified the mind, and the third brought gratitude for both. In the mountains of China, poets once described the ideal afternoon: a book, a pot of tea, and the sound of wind through bamboo. They believed that to be alone in such moments was not to be cut off from the world, but to be joined to it more deeply. Solitude opened the senses. The rustle of leaves became music. The scent of the brew became the voice of the earth. To drink tea alone was to remember that one is never truly alone. In modern life, solitude often hides behind distraction. Phones hum, screens glow, thoughts scatter. But even now, a cup of tea can draw the mind back to stillness. It asks for attention, but only gently. You cannot drink tea quickly without missing it. You must wait for the water to cool, must hold the cup, must breathe between sips. In those pauses, something quiet returns the awareness of being alive. Some people speak aloud when they drink tea alone. They talk to their memories, to those who are gone, or to parts of themselves long forgotten. The warmth of the cup makes such confessions easier. The tea listens without judgment. Others say nothing at all. They simply sit and let the silence expand until it fills the room. In that silence, emotions soften, anger cools, sorrow becomes bearable, and even joy takes a gentler shape. Tea turns solitude into acceptance. The beauty of the ritual is that it needs nothing elaborate. A chipped cup, a kettle that whistles, a table near a window that is enough. Through repetition, these small things become familiar, almost sacred. Over time, the act of making tea becomes a language the body understands. When the hands move to pour, the mind already begins to rest. When the cup touches the lips, peace follows naturally. Even in sadness, tea can bring solace. It does not erase pain, but it gives it space to breathe. The warmth steadies the shaking hand. The steam softens the sting of tears. There is comfort in the knowledge that generations before have done the same, sat in silence, faced themselves, and found strength in something as small as a leaf steeped in water. When the last sip is gone, the solitude does not end. It lingers, like the faint taste left on the tongue. The mind feels clearer, the heart less heavy. The room, once empty, feels full again, not with company but with calm. That is the quiet gift of tea in solitude. It does not fill the silence, it transforms it. Outside, the world remains unchanged. The rain still falls, the wind still moves. But inside, something has shifted. The self that began the cup and the self that finishes it are not quite the same. Between the pouring and the last sip lies a kind of renewal, not loud, not dramatic, but real. And so, when life grows heavy or loud, when thoughts refuse to settle, one needs only to boil water and wait. The leaf will do the rest. In its slow unfurling, it will remind you that peace does not need to be found elsewhere. It can be steeped here, now, in the small, quiet company of yourself. Every culture that has embraced tea has discovered that it is more than a drink. It is a way of thinking, a mirror held gently to the self. Tea teaches not through instruction, but through repetition. Every time we boil water, every time we wait, pour, and sip, we practice patience. Every time we taste, we remember impermanence. In that sense, Tea is both teacher and reflection, a philosophy disguised as warmth. To sit with a cup of tea is to sit with time itself. The heat that fades, the steam that rises, the color that deepens, all these are reminders that every moment lives and dies in the same breath. Nothing in tea stays fixed. Even the leaf, once plucked, continues to change. It curls, dries, opens again in water, and dissolves. Its journey is one of constant transformation, yet it never loses its essence. So too are we shaped by air, by fire, by waiting. Many people think that reflection requires great effort, but tea teaches the opposite. Awareness does not come from striving, but from noticing. When you pour water into the cup, when you listen to the faint hiss of the leaves, when you watch the surface ripple, these small observations become a meditation. You do not force clarity, you allow it. The mind settles the way tea does, slowly, after the stirring stops. Philosophers in China once said that tea reveals the nature of harmony. It shows how strength and gentleness can exist together. The leaf, fragile on its own, becomes strong when joined with boiling water. The water, violent in its heat, becomes calm when it meets the leaf. Each changes the other, and together they create something new, neither leaf nor water, but balance. Reflection begins with the same realization that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the union of opposites. When people drink tea while thinking deeply, they often find their thoughts taking shape in rhythm with the ritual. The act of brewing divides the chaos of ideas into order. The first pour brings focus, the second brings perspective, and the third brings acceptance. The rhythm of the process becomes a rhythm of the mind. What seemed tangled before begins to unwind. In the pause between sips, insight appears not as a lightning strike, but as a soft glow. In monasteries and temples, this principle became part of daily life. Monks drank tea not to stay awake, but to remain aware. They understood that the mind, like water, grows restless when overheated and dull when cold. The right balance, the gentle warmth of attention, allows both tea and thought to bloom. The steam rising from the bowl was seen as the breath of mindfulness itself, a symbol of impermanence made visible. Even outside the temple, tea invites reflection. A worker taking a break, a scholar pausing between pages, a parent watching rain from the window, each finds in tea the same quiet invitation to slow down. The cup becomes a boundary between the noise of the world and the silence within. The first sip clears the senses, the second opens the heart. The third, though often unnoticed, is gratitude, the awareness that, even in small things, meaning can be found. Reflection through tea does not demand answers. It does not insist on philosophy or belief. It simply offers space. Some people find memories rising in the steam, faces long gone, words once spoken, moments half forgotten. Others find only silence, and within it, peace. Both are valuable. Tea does not judge the thoughts it awakens. It holds them gently, letting them float and fade like leaves in water. Over time, the ritual of tea becomes a ritual of perspective. It reminds us that life, like flavor, changes depending on how we brew it. If we rush, it turns bitter. If we wait too long, it cools and loses strength. The lesson is not to control, but to listen. The water tells you when it is ready. The scent tells you when to pour. The moment tells you when to stop. The world, like tea, reveals itself through patience. When the cup is nearly empty, reflection deepens. The last drops at the bottom often taste stronger, more concentrated, a reminder that what remains is sometimes the truest part. The warmth lingers on the hands even after the liquid is gone. It is a quiet echo of experience, the proof that something passed through you and left its trace. Reflection is the same. The thoughts fade, but the understanding stays. In that final stillness, when the cup rests empty, there is a feeling that cannot be named. It is not joy, not sadness, not wisdom, but something simpler, presence. The same presence that existed when the water boiled, when the leaves unfurled, when the steam rose and disappeared. To live fully, tea suggests, is to pay attention to these small passages. They are not interruptions of life, they are life itself. And so, tea becomes a reminder that reflection does not happen apart from the world but within it. Every sip is a lesson in change, in patience, in gratitude. When you hold the cup, you hold the moment. When you drink, you release it. Between the two lies everything worth knowing. No matter where in the world you go, the sound of water meeting leaves feels the same. The scent changes, the vessels differ, the rituals vary, but the heart of it, that quiet exchange between hand, cup, and breath, never does. Tea has crossed mountains, deserts, oceans, and centuries, yet it has never lost its meaning. It speaks a language older than any nation, a language made of warmth and stillness, understood without translation. In China, it remains a symbol of respect. A younger person pours tea for an elder, bowing slightly as a gesture of gratitude. The motion is simple but full of grace. In Japan, tea is still meditation, a mirror of harmony and impermanence. In India, it fills the streets in clay cups, sweet and spiced, shared between strangers who exchange stories instead of names. In the Middle East, it is poured endlessly, a sign that a guest is welcome for as long as the pot stays hot. And in Britain, it is a pause between hours, a brief sanctuary from the weather and the weight of the day. Different lands, same warmth. Every culture bends tea to its own rhythm, yet the essence remains, it gathers people. In Morocco, tea is poured from a height, the stream glimmering in the air before it meets the glass, a performance of generosity. In Russia, the samovar hums at the center of the table, its steady warmth binding the family through winter nights. In Tibet, tea is thick with butter and salt, a drink of survival and community. In each place, the act of serving says more than any word. It says, sit, rest, you are not alone. There is a quiet democracy in tea that few things achieve. It belongs equally to palaces and to roadside stalls, to those who sip from porcelain and those who drink from tin. The emperor and the laborer may taste the same comfort, the same release. Tea levels the human experience. It reminds us that beneath the layers of wealth and worry, we all seek the same warmth, a moment to breathe, a taste that soothes, a ritual that connects us to others and to ourselves. Even in places where tea was once foreign, it has found a home. In the Americas, it came as part of trade and conquest, yet it stayed for love. In Africa, it took root in red soil and gave rise to rooibos, not true tea, but a relative in spirit. In the Arctic, explorers brewed it from herbs and bark, chasing the memory of comfort through endless cold. Everywhere it traveled, tea adapted, and in adapting, it revealed the resilience of peace. To drink tea in a foreign land is to understand that you are never completely a stranger. The taste changes, but the gesture stays the same. Someone boils water, someone offers you a cup. For a moment, you belong. Words might fail, customs might differ, but the warmth between hands is universal. That warmth is the true language of tea, the moment when distance becomes closeness and silence becomes understanding. Travelers have often described tea as the soul of hospitality. It appears at every threshold, in every climate. It greets the weary, comforts the grieving, celebrates the joyful. No one owns it, yet everyone recognizes it. It is the shared heartbeat of humanity, echoing through homes and markets, temples and kitchens. Where there is tea, there is an unspoken promise. You will be seen and you will be cared for. What makes this language powerful is its simplicity. It asks for no translation, no belief, no creed. It carries meaning through warmth and motion alone. A child can learn it. An elder can still speak it. It passes through generations unchanged because it was never bound to words in the first place. Tea is what happens when people stop trying to be impressive and begin simply to be present. In a world that often divides itself by difference, tea offers a rare reminder of unity. Its journey across history is the journey of connection itself, proof that peace can travel further than conquest, that quiet gestures can outlast empires. It has been carried in the hands of monks and merchants, poets and peasants, kings and rebels. Each left something of themselves in the ritual, yet none could claim to own it. The cup remained open to all. Today, whether in a crowded cafe or a silent home, that same ritual endures. The boiling water, the patient pour, the first sip all unchanged. Even in the rush of modern life, people still turn to tea when words fail, when hearts tire, when the day needs to slow. It is the one conversation that requires no speech, the one comfort that survives translation. Perhaps that is the secret of its endurance. Tea does not demand to be noticed. It does not need attention or ceremony to be profound. Its strength lies in gentleness, in the way it slips quietly into every culture and every moment. When you drink it, you join an unbroken line that stretches backward through centuries. Millions of hands lifting millions of cups, each finding the same calm. The language of tea has no alphabet, no grammar. It is spoken through warmth, through breath, through the faint sound of a kettle. To listen is to understand, to drink is to belong. And long after the cup is empty, the message remains, written not on paper, but in the stillness it leaves behind. The story of tea, like the story of life, always ends the same way with an empty cup. No matter where it is poured, or by whose hands, every journey of the leaf leads to that quiet moment when warmth fades and stillness returns. The last sip is not a conclusion, but a reminder that everything complete must also be released. The leaf knows this truth, so does the water, and if we listen closely, so do we. When the tea is gone, the cup holds more than emptiness, it holds memory. The faint ring of warmth on its surface, the echo of steam that once rose into the air, these are small ghosts of the moment just past. They linger, soft and invisible, long after the taste has disappeared. You can see them only if you are still enough to notice. The space that remains is not absence, but peace. It is the pause between breaths, the quiet heartbeat of awareness. Every sip of tea mirrors the rhythm of being alive. There is the anticipation as water meets leaf, the beginning, full of promise. Then comes the steeping time and patience blending into depth. And finally, the drinking, the experience itself, fleeting but complete. Each stage carries its own truth. Together they teach that living is not about clinging, but about moving gently from one moment to the next, allowing each to unfold and dissolve without regret. Tea is, in its way, a rehearsal for letting go. The warmth fades, the steam vanishes, the taste softens until it becomes memory. Yet we do not mourn it. We refill the cup again and again, knowing that the beauty of the experience lies in its impermanence. The act of drinking teaches acceptance of time, of change, of loss, of renewal. To live well is to drink well, with awareness, with gratitude, with calm. As the centuries have passed, tea has traveled through empires and revolutions, through faiths and philosophies, through triumph and grief. It has been carried by monks and merchants, kings and farmers, rebels and dreamers, and in every hand it meant something slightly different, a prayer, a comfort, a pause, a promise. But beneath all these meanings, one truth endures. Tea is the art of presence. Wherever it goes, it invites the same stillness. Imagine, for a moment, the leaf returning to the earth. After all the fires and waters it has known, it falls back to soil, feeding the roots of the next generation. The circle closes quietly. Nothing wasted, nothing lost. The same balance that begins in the mountains finds its way into our cups, then back into the ground. The act of drinking is part of that endless cycle. We are not outside it, but within it. The calm we feel after tea is not escape, it is recognition. In the calm after the last sip, the mind begins to mirror the cup, clear, empty, open. Thoughts that once clattered now rest. The body softens, the air seems thicker, slower. This is the moment monks once called the taste beyond taste. It is not a flavor, but a feeling, the awareness that everything is connected, that nothing needs to be held. It is the quiet joy that arrives only when nothing more is required. Some people call this meditation, others call it rest. Tea does not care for the word, it simply exists. The leaf never tries to teach, but it teaches all the same. It shows that peace is not something found in distant places, but in small repeated gestures, pouring, waiting, sipping, breathing. The world has grown louder, faster, more demanding, yet the lesson of tea has never changed. Slow down, be present, let things cool. When the last drop is gone, there is often a temptation to refill the cup, but sometimes the truer act is to stop, to sit with what remains. The empty cup reflects light differently. Its silence feels earned. It becomes a mirror, not of what has been drunk, but of what has been learned. Every ending, tea reminds us, is simply a place to begin again. Outside, the air may carry wind or rain, the day may grow darker or the night deeper, but inside, the warmth of tea lingers in the chest, spreading softly through the body like an echo of sunlight. You can feel it if you sit long enough, if you breathe slowly enough. It is not dramatic, not loud, just steady, like a heartbeat that no longer rushes. And so, after thousands of years, after every voyage, every ritual, every story told in steam and silence, tea remains what it has always been, a bridge between moments, between the living and the gone, between noise and quiet, between one breath and the next. You lift the cup, now empty, and set it down. The sound is gentle, almost a whisper. The world around you feels softer, more distant, as if wrapped in mist. For a moment, everything is still: the air, the thoughts, the self, and in that stillness, the story of tea becomes complete. The kettle cools, the leaves rest, the cup waits. Tomorrow it will begin again. The water will boil, the steam will rise, and somewhere in a mountain hut, a city kitchen, or a quiet corner of the night, someone will take that first sip and close their eyes. The journey continues, not in the telling, but in the taste. The leaf returns to water, the water returns to peace, and peace, as it always does, returns to us.